Hello, everybody, and welcome to the June 1st, 2023 meeting of the KubeStellar Community. Thank you all for your attendance. And let me switch over to our repo to just open an issue here and make sure the issue's here. Good. Okay. So before we get started, thank you all for joining. I'll read our contributor code of conduct. As contributors and maintainers in the CNCF community, and in the interest of fostering an open and welcoming community, we pledge to respect all people who contribute through reporting issues, posting feature requests, updating documentation, submitting pull requests, or patches and other activities. We are committed to making participation in the CNCF community a harassment-free experience for everyone, and regardless of level of experience, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, disability, personal appearance, body size, race, ethnicity, age, religion, or nationality. Basically, what all that means is please just be nice to each other. Thank you very much. Okay, I see we might have some new members in the audience here, so I wanted to say welcome to you, and if you'd like a minute to introduce yourself or talk to anybody else in chat, please do so. Okay. All right, thank you very much. Let's move to the agenda. All right, so if you want to open the agenda and follow along with me, you can feel free to edit or update it as you wish. So today we have a couple of items on the agenda that have to do with some kind of housekeeping things. So I thought I'd get those out of the way first. So you'll have the ability in WebEx to vote by thumbs up or thumbs down, or you can just abstain. Just use the thumbs up when we call votes. The following two items in the agenda require a vote. So of 2/3 majority based on our governance. So I wanted to request the addition of Braulio Dumba and June Duan, who are Doom 0002 and Wait for Me, represented as GitHub IDs, to be added to the owners to help with PR approvals, and this is in anticipation of growth of the community. So I wanted to put forth for a vote first. First, Braulio or June, do you want to say anything on your behalf?
Yeah, I feel happy with this because I remember at the beginning of the GMC project, I saw some small PR. Maybe it's just some typo fix. I was sure that this PR could be quickly merged and move forward, but at that time I don't have that privilege. So if I have this new role assigned to me, I believe that it's good for us to move faster for the development. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you, June. Braulio, anything you'd like to say?
Myself, just like to thank the community for this nomination, and I'm looking forward to continue serving at KubeStellar community.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Braulio or June about their nomination? Okay. All right. Without further ado, let's start with the first in the list in that particular order. Braulio Dumba, can I get a show of, and I can't give my thumbs up or thumbs down because I don't know how to do that through here when I'm sharing. But Braulio Dumba, can I see a show of thumbs? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Do I even get to vote, Andy?
Yes, yes, Andre. Yes, you're a member of the community.
Yay, excellent.
All right. Okay, 6. Okay, and I give my vote, and Andre, thank you. Okay, Braulio Dumba is now accepted as an owner and will be added to the owner's file. Congratulations, Braulio. Okay, next up is June Duan's vote. Can I have a show of thumbs clapping. Very good, Franco. Okay, I'll take that as a thumbs up. All right, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, great. We have majority on that as well. So June Duan will be added to the owner's file to help with PR approvals. Congratulations, June and Braulio. Thank you very much for your dedication to the project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we don't have them present here on this call today, so but they have been part of the community for quite a while. Stefan Szymanski, who is represented by @STTTS, and Sebastian Shields, who is the CEO, I believe, of kubermatic. So Stefan, you may remember, he was part of the Red Hat organization. He recently left and joined Upbound.io. Upbound.io and kubermatic together are working to continue to work on KCP, although a little bit scaled down in terms of the number of priorities that they have to work with. They're down from 6 major priorities down to 3. They are actively removing TMC from their code base. I've been watching the commits on a daily basis. They're both interested in becoming governance board members for our community. And that would, require, I guess, regular attendance, of course, but also has a few other requirements in terms of steering the project and keeping it on track and not expanding beyond its scope. I think I can just speak on Stefan's behalf and Sebastian's. I think they have a really good handle on what it takes to run open source communities, having done it a few times themselves. And I think that their project, KCP, was very influential, and in fact is still being used by our project at the moment as a mainstay. And so I think that they would be good for an addition to our governance board. This would also help us with approvals down the line when we go for CNCF sandbox, which we're under consideration for right now. So I think it's important to have them to show that we have have a bit more diverse community than just IDM. And so this would give us some diversity in our governance. So with that, does anybody else want to say anything on behalf of Stefan, for or against, or for or against Sebastian, since they can't speak for themselves? Okay, then without further ado, I'll bring it to a vote. Or thumbs up again if you, or abstain for Stefan Szymanski to join our governance board. Oh, sorry, Franco, did you have? Okay, go ahead. Yep. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we have a majority on Stefan. Let's move on to Sebastian Shields. Sebastian Shields, let's have a vote. Thumbs up, please, if you approve of his placement on our board. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, great. So Sebastian is approved. Okay, folks. Thank you very much for going through that process. I appreciate it. It was just something that we needed to do in order to show our adherence to our governance. Okay, so let's move on. I'll notify Sebastian and Stefan of the good news. All right. So something else I wanted to inform you, some more housekeeping items. I've had some updates to our GitHub repo that I think are important to share with the community. We've put in place, I've got some new actions that are being used to on check-ins or on merges, pushes, pulls, also on demand. Add issues to project was not working before. So what this action does is it just takes an issue and adds it to our project, which it's a Kanban board, assigns it as a new issue and also gives it a date and time, which isn't by default given to an issue when you open it. You'll see this action gets invoked when you open a new issue. Add pull request to a project. This happens when you add a new pull request. It also assigns the author as being the person who opened the PR. For now, that should be satisfactory. If we need to change that behavior, we can. I'll show you what this looks like in the projects in just a second. I don't want to navigate away. Broken links crawler. It was put in place because of our docs, both branches of docs and any branches we introduce in the future. This crawls the entire doc site and makes sure that there's no 404s. And make sure that we're all getting 200s back from those links. It's passing at the moment and should continue to do so. When you check in a PR that includes a doc file, it will go ahead and check this. If you get a failure, you won't be able to proceed past that to merge. So you have to fix the broken link and then try again. This is good for continuous integration. Generate and push docs. This actually, once the document has been merged, it'll generate and push the document into our doc site. So it runs things like MKDocs and Mike in order to compile and place the documents in their compiled form, or how would you? It's not really compiled, but I guess so. We'll leave it at that. Their build form and puts them into the GH pages, GH-pages branch of our repository, which is then served by KubeStellar.io domain at docs.kubestellar.io. Our PR verified, nothing new there. That was what we originally had and was working. That uses PROW still under the cover for things in Tide and triggers all the other, and it does things PROW related. And spell check action. This is something that I noticed. Andrea, thank you so much as part of the community. You did us an incredible service. Nobody else caught it, but you. On our main page, the word multi-cluster was misspelled. I had misspelled it. It was Mutley cluster, and it manifested itself into many other places in the repository. So I wanted to say thank you very much for finding that. This is the output of the spell checker. It can right now I'm running it on demand as a workflow dispatch. But you can see it goes through, checks each of the files in the docs that are .md and determines whether or not those docs have a violation in terms of the spelling, like things like described is misspelled in this particular doc. So PRs will flow as a result of this being run on a periodic basis. I'm not so sure that I'm ready to put this in place for regular check-ins just yet until we get to a point where we've got a defined word list that covers all the bases. The word list that we're using, in addition to the English language, is 347 entries long at the moment, and probably will continue to grow slightly in a nonlinear format, I think, in the coming days ahead as we identify other words or usages that we don't have. It does flag camel case because it's not any term that you used as an API reference is in the wild or in a doc setting. If it is directly from code, then it may not be in camel case, but if we're using it in documentation, then we probably should try to preserve the consistency of that representation of that document. So that's the update on GitHub Actions. Any feedback up on GitHub Actions? Okay. All right. Next up, moving to a new repo. As you all may be aware, we're currently in KCP's KCP Dev organization, which is owned and controlled by Red Hat. I am an administrator there, so there's no worry about needing to be able to change settings or add people to the organization or any of the representative projects or teams. So no fear there, but eventually we do want to move on to our own real estate. And as such, I've secured a repo called an organization called KubeStellar, and added an initial project called KubeStellar in there, and I've started to pull and mirror our current Edge MC to KubeStellar/KubeStellar. It's a private repo at the moment. You don't have access to it, so don't if you're checking for it, you'll just see that it's been taken. So I wanted to just leave it out there in the open and put it on record. I've been successful in mirroring the repo, but I have not been successful in mirror issues, PRs, discussions, or project, or PROW connections for that matter, which I know will become a problem amongst the other things that we know will break should we move. But I wanted to pose it to the community. Does anybody have any information or experience with doing a project transfer from an existing repo to another repo? And do you know what artifacts come along with it? My question to the community. Alec, Mike, anybody, June, Braulio?
I know that is a problem. I had few years ago. I was hoping GitHub would make it easier, but I guess not. It's kind of funny
that transfer yet. So transfer might be the answer. I'm just doing a mirror at the moment.
Right. They keep all that information in their own internal databases. That's why I think it is difficult to export and import.
All right, I'll have to do some more reading on it. I'll be opening an issue later today with respect to this planned move. We don't intend on doing this anytime soon. It'll probably be done within in the month of July. That's what I'm targeting now, and we'll probably create a war room for the time at which we plan to cut over. All right. Next up, Mike and Ezra. I don't see Ezra on the call here, but Mike, would you like to take us through any of the concerns that you have about what TMC moving out of KCP? And, specifically, I guess you had sync targets and location resources that are currently using TMC.
Right. So that's the only part of TMC that KubeStellar is using, the definitions of those. So we need to adopt those object type definitions into KubeStellar. That's the first and simplest step. The next question is, do we want to revise them to make them a better fit for our purpose? They were designed with the concepts of TMC in mind. One detail is the API groupings. Currently, they are in two different API groups. In the KCP projects, they divided their API groups quite finely. Whereas so far in KubeStellar, we started out with really just one API group holding all the object types. And we can revise that if and when we see a reason to. I'm not sure at this point we see a reason. It might be simplest just to put the moved objects into the one existing API group, which will of course have to be renamed as part of the ongoing rebranding exercise, but that's a separate step. But for example, the conception in TMC was a little different in that it was intended to abstract away synctargets and have the placements refer to locations. Well, it was kind of mixed. But anyway, I think our concepts are a little different. We really do focus on the managed cluster, which is currently represented by the synctarget. We might want to rename that. Maybe something simpler like cluster or managed cluster. And the location is, we started with this edge orientation, which is for enterprises that have a distinct geographical organization. For general multi-cluster use, that may or may not be so appropriate. So we might want to de-emphasize the location and focus exclusively on the managed cluster. I'm also reminded, of course, there are other projects such as OCM, which have managed clusters as well. Maybe we should simply use their object type rather than creating another one. So, these are all related questions.
All right, thank you, Mike. Any do we want to open an issue to track this, or is this something
Well,
you think?
sure. I mean, obviously there should be an issue as a general principle, right? We should have issues describing the work that's in progress. So yes.
Okay.
So as a community meeting, right, this is a prompt for people to offer thoughts and opinions on the subject.
All right. I don't see anybody raising their hand, so Mike, I don't think we have anything more to explain here. Maybe what you can do is come back next time when the issue open. Let's enumerate some of your thoughts in there, and let's see if we can circulate it again to get people to weigh in on what it might take to pull this off.
Yeah, or maybe even move faster. And in fact, that's going to be prompted, I think, by the item about the 126 rebase. There's not yet, I'll just say the connection, right? There's not yet a new release of KCP, but I hope there will be. It will include the 1.26 rebase, and they're also working on excising TMC. So at that point, we may not have the option to continue poaching on those existing data types.
So this is a good point that you bring up, Mike, and I'm glad you brought it up today. It's timely. So perhaps it's time to intervene with KCP, talk to Stefan, let's find out A, when they're resuming meetings, and B, if they would be okay with providing a release that's 126 based without the excise of TMC, so that we don't get caught in a spiral.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. That's the only input I have for you. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Let's see. Anything you want to mention about Kube-bind, or do you want to do rebase first, Mike? You're up. You've got 3 in a row here coming up.
Yeah.
Or you got
Well,
a question.
maybe we'll just continue on the rebase thought. So, they have nominally completed the rebase. I tested it, found a problem, just got a fix in, so I'm going to go back to testing it. But, it's something I've been anticipating for months, and as you just said, I hope we can get a release soon and rebase onto that KCP release.
Okay. Yeah, I hope so too, and I hope it's not conflated. Okay, good. All right. Anything on Kube? Anybody with questions on the 126 rebase? Why it's necessary? What Mike found in terms of Mike? What'd you find in terms of a bug?
I found the server logs were having a lot of complaints about something that was going wrong internally. A part of their mechanism was broken. It was looking for objects in the wrong workspace. And so Stefan guided me to fixing that. So that's that.
Okay. Very good. Okay, good. All right. You want to anybody with any questions on the rebase for 126? Okay. All right. Kube-bind, Mike. Kube-bind versus API import export.
Right. So, as we work to become independent of KCP, right? And the goal, in my mind at least, what we should be aiming to do is we want KubeStellar to be able to work with KCP and able to work without KCP. And currently we're using this API export and bind mechanism that is specific to KCP. There is this public Kube-bind thing, which is Stefan created, kind of abstracting some of the core functionality of that out into something independent of KCP. So, to be independent of KCP, we could simply adopt that, and that's probably step 1. But step 2 is to remember, well, maybe there's a few steps. So the Kube-bind that Stefan extracted from KCP, the Kube-bind version is less functional. I believe it's lacking some permission claim functionality, which currently we're not using, but that's only due to the fact that we're not paying attention really seriously to permissions at all. As soon as we start paying attention carefully to permissions, we're going to need permission claims in Kube-bind. And I'm going to just start by presuming that that can be added, since that's an open source project, and this is a logical part of that. Little bit of an open question of whether we can get the particular sorts of permission claims we need in KubeStellar added to Kube-bind. That's TBD. But I think the more challenging thought is that the Kube-bind version, because it's independent of KCP, does not rely on the server virtualization in KCP, is inherently less efficient. And whenever we talk with the KCP people about this, they emphasize this point. It is significantly less efficient inherently. And I would like to, as I say, I think we should have KubeStellar able to work with KCP. And in that case, I would like it to be able to work efficiently. This is something that kubermatic emphasized is important to them, is the efficiency. So what I would hope we can get to is a point where we can use either version of this functionality. So that would call for some sort of abstraction layer. And that's as far as my thinking has gone so far.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes good sense. I think that along as you remind us on a regular that KCP is modular or has many components. This being one of them, I think our plan to abstract KCP for its use in very layman terms, for its use as underlying API machinery is, I think it extends itself to be, to fit quite nicely in the case that we should have the facility of API import or export or Kube-bind, right, available to us. There might be other facilities that rise as a result of this. I think if I'm looking at this from an open source perspective, I think once people determine the value of API import and export, and I think a lot of people have discounted it, to be honest. I think once they determine the value, and I just saw somebody opened an issue, I believe, inside of the KCP repo. You can go look. I think it just got opened last night, and and somebody was very impressed with the capability and wanted to learn how to use it more. So I think this will catch on. You know, more people understand the value and start to use it. And I think at that point, if we're in the middle of it, then that would be great. And to be able to use other, you know, forks of this kind of tech, this kind of functionality. So yeah, I think we're in a good position to do that. So if we can abstract from it, that would be great.
Yeah,
That's my personal opinion.
I think it's valuable and interesting. I think I have a little different take than Stefan of exactly why it's good and valuable and interesting. So now that you mention it, maybe I should try to make some more noise about my view of why it's good. But yeah, I think it's interesting as a general, you know, for general usage.
Of any kind, project / code useful here for KubeStellar. Okay, cool. All right, Mike. Any questions for Mike about Kube-bind and API import export? June, do you have any color you'd like to add there? Or Bob, do you have any? I know the two of you have been working on that as well. Anything you'd like to add to that discussion?
No, I don't have anything to add. I'm just trying to learning and exercising with Kube-bind at this stage.
Yeah, same thing here.
Okay. Just for the record, would both of you mind going through really quickly? I know it's not on the agenda here, but it just came to mind that it would be good to inform others that'll watch the recording later. Do you have anything you'd like to share in terms of what you were able to get working with Kube-bind?
Well, I've been running the MongoDB example that's described in the README of Kube-bind, and I've been doing that on the local VirtualBox VM running Ubuntu with a with kind clusters. So I have a kind provider cluster and a kind consumer cluster. So the example application, if you will, is running in the provider, and it's connecting to an external website, mangodb.com, to get, I believe, to get the spec of the API service binding of the CRD, what essentially becomes a CRD, and it builds that, or it deploys that out to the consumer cluster. So one of the features that that Kube-bind is providing is the ability to do some OIDC authentication, which this or it seems to be used for this particular example at any rate. So in order to be able to perform that authentication, I actually had to deploy a web browser into my VM, which meant I had to deploy a minimal desktop, and then on top of that, I put in the Epiphany browser. So then I was able to run through that example. It created an API service binding in the consumer, and now and then the connector services are running. I still need to review the logs of those.
Hey Bob, I got a question for you about what you've been working on. I heard this, you mentioned OIDC. So is there the notion of some kind of secure handshake taking place between the exporter and the importer with Kube-bind?
I'm not sure exactly what's happening in there, but I think that that's an option.
I see. We don't have that for KCP's API import and export, do we? That's not an option there, is it?
No, it's not required because it's all within one virtualized server. So, yeah, that's
Okay.
kind of another corollary of that setting.
Okay. Interesting. Hmm.
Okay,
I'm
so
gonna
I have a
watch that.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at the repository. I just came out into GitHub and it looks like there's 20 releases. They're on a v0.3.0 and the latest one is from October 29th, 2022. What's that about? I'm just really curious. That's a
You
really
talking
long
about-
time ago and it looks like it's fairly active. So they're just not releasing anything? Like what's going on?
Yeah, you're talking about the KCP repository, Andrea?
No, this is Kube-bind.
Oh, Kube-bind. Okay. I think June's had some experience with that. June?
Yeah, I have I have a small PR to fix some some logic operator in one of the controllers, and that small PR takes a week to merge. But I will not say it's abundant because there are multiple people still respond to me, and there are discussions going on in the Slack channels. So I would say it's still under proper maintenance, but not as active as KCP or other open source projects.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, June, because I was just concerned because I'm like, because it's early stage, I would expect them to, and maybe this is not the proper behavior, but I would have expect they would be pushing a lot of things, right? If there's a lot of activity, they'd be kind of pushing things into like a pre V1 release, whatever that numbering system is. And just the fact that it's been sitting for like almost a year since it's been a new release just seemed a little alarming, but maybe it's just normal and I don't know what I'm talking about. Wouldn't be the first time, let me tell you that.
No, Andrea, I think you bring a good point. Did you say October of 22 or earlier than that? What was the last
October, if you go here, if you go to Kube-bind, here, let me drop it in the chat. And you click on the first repo, right, which is the Kube-bind repo. The date I see, the latest release is on October 29th, 2022.
It is 22. Okay. What was their
Like
cadence
I said,
before
it looks
then?
kind of active. There's a lot of things going on, so I'm just like not really sure what's happening.
23rd, 22nd. I'm looking to see. Looks like there was a flurry of activity in that 1 week to push out about 2 weeks. No, yeah, about 16th to the 29th. So about a 2 week period where they were trying to get things put together to make an official release, and then they stopped.
Well, and we do that, internally we will do that, right? Like we did that, for example, on Codeflare. Like if you just moseyed into the Codeflare repo from nowhere, you would be like, wow, they're not doing anything here. And it's like there was a ton of stuff happening. So I wasn't sure if it was a case of that, where it was like maybe a more corporate view of things, like, yeah, we're doing a bunch of stuff. It just hasn't hit this repo yet. Or I just wasn't sure. It just seemed like that was a really long time.
Hey, June, do you think it's worthwhile you just prompting somebody in the Kube-bind Slack channel to see if they are planning on another release anytime soon?
Yeah, definitely I can ask that. But as Alex just posted in the channel, I think before KubeCon it is more actively developed.
Good point.
Yeah, after the presentation, I think it's kind of cooling down.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I wasn't using a release of theirs. And then the instructions, if you would follow their README, they didn't want you to do a build.
Okay. All right. And June, did you have any success with your experiment with Kube-bind? Can you share it with us?
Oh yes, since Bob is running the MongoDB example, I tried another example, which is try to use Knative service as the stuff being provided by the provider cluster. I was able to use a regular Kubernetes cluster on AWS, hosted on AWS as my provider, and use my local client cluster as a consumer, I successfully bind the Knative service API from my provider to the consumer. For the next steps, I want to see whether these bound CRs are synced correctly between the provider and the consumer, as well as I also want to try our own APIs, for example, edge placement, to see whether it works.
Okay. Is actively testing whether KCP API import. Okay, very good. Mike, any questions for Bob or June? Okay, great. Thank you very much for your updates, and thank you for your question, Andrea, and your input, Pollock. Okay, customization, Mike.
Right. So we have currently there's a discussion open on this, so I'll want to encourage people to read the discussion and respond there or here. So the current state of what's merged is there is something there that is a little restricted in its syntax, and thus semantics, of course, and inefficient. And I'm looking at doing better. There's a PR that is one way to go. The discussion calls out possibly some other ways to go. So I think the thing that I would most like is some feedback on what's desirable here. And so the problem concerns the intermediate level of customization. So recall that there are 3 levels. The simplest is just substring replacement, which I called parameter expansion. The most sophisticated is entirely outside of KubeStellar. It is using something that can go and do much deeper and radical customization, such as in Helm charts. And the linkage could be through, so for example, in FluxCD, they have a state-based API to Helm charts, and one could make the linkage by using the API object, applying KubeStellar parameter expansion to the API object that prescribes how to instantiate a chart and override some of the variables in it. And that would be a very flexible way, kind of a little bit Rube Goldberg, not terribly, but it's a few steps. So we do have this intermediate way of expressing customization that is, like you see in Customize, it's a bunch of look there and replace it with that pairs. And the current, what's currently merged is that the look there is expressed in JSON path. We could imagine other ways of saying how to look there. We could imagine other ways of expressing this intermediate level of customization. So for example, in the Kubernetes world, there is also patching. So instead of the look there, replace it with that pairs, we could have the sort of patching functionality you get in kubectl patch. That would be a possible alternative. But if we want to keep with a look there and replace it with that using JSON path, there are some choices to make. So one of the interesting things about JSON path is it's a way with one path expression you can actually point to many places because it's got wildcards. And there are some subtleties about what those things mean. And anyway, so there's kind of a bunch of choices, and I just want to, mostly what I want is some, feedback or guidance on which way we want to go. So, I'd like to see some examples. I'd like to hear from the community what they think is or is not important to accomplish, preferences for style. Personally, I think that the look there, replace it with that, is probably the way to go because it is like other systems that do similar things. So consistency, I think, is good in general, and also greases the skids for perhaps unification down the road. So I do have a preference along that line. Anyway, looking for feedback here.
Mike, good primer there. Is there any? I just had the darn thing open. Let me see if I can get back to it. Which discussion were you actually focusing on? Was that this
That one
one?
right there, yes.
453. Okay. What's the relation, or do you need feedback, or is there anything that this is related back to 452?
Right, that's another issue that is common to the current design for customization and for summarization. It's a separate issue, right? So the first issue is how to express the customization. The other is how to link the expression of customization to the objects to be customized.
Okay. All right. Okay. Any questions for Mike about the discussions or how to find them in our repo? Okay, so everyone here has valid thoughts and opinions, and that's the way our community works. So we'd love to have your input there. If any of you have a few minutes to read what Mike has written in these discussions and respond in some way, shape, or fashion to either pose an interesting question. It doesn't even have to be an interesting one, just a question to further the discussion or to give some feedback about experiences you've had in the past. It would all be very valuable, and we'd appreciate it very much. Any questions for Mike on customization?
Mm-hmm. Let me just add a little specifically. I would like to have examples that we could maintain in our repo. So if anybody has like real life examples, that would be great.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Does that cover summarization also, or do you want to take some time with that? Or
Yeah. So
okay.
there are, I opened 3 discussions. One is how to express customization. One is how to express summarization, and one is how to link those expressions with the objects that they would apply to. So for the how to express summarization issue, it's I made a proposal last year, before this community even formed. It's referenced there, and I'm working on a revision. The primary motivation or content or substance of the revision is that the proposal last year was much more limited in its expressiveness. It was focused on the idea of making histograms of feature vectors, and I think that it would be better to align conceptually more with the way aggregation is done in SQL. So you will see in the conceptual design and the words used here more of an alignment with SQL. But I do also like the histogram functionality, which is not directly in SQL. So one of the questions is how to keep that. Another is concerns, again, expressiveness. This proposal is working with strings or numbers, but basically just picking fields out of a JSON object, because all this data here can be viewed as JSON. And that's one level of ambition. One could get more ambitious, and rather than just pick out individual fields, apply, yes, the common expression language, often pronounced CEL, C-E-L. That is something of growing presence in the Kubernetes world, but it is more expensive to evaluate. It also does have the advantage that you can do type checking. If you have the schema of the objects to be that the expressions will be applied to for a given expression, if you have the schema of the objects that it will be applied to, you can do type checking before you apply it to perhaps many objects that follow that schema. And this fits the pattern of what we're doing with downsynced objects. Or upsynced, since they're all born individually in the managed clusters, that's a little more challenging. But when we get to doing summarization, we still will be bringing them together. So there may still be the opportunity to say, okay, yes, we're going to do something about understanding the schema. That's very much TBD. But again, this type checking in cell is optional. So, we might be in a situation where we can type check proactively for downsynced, but not for upsynced. Anyway, again, looking for feedback on, what people would find valuable. And there's a trade-off here, as I said, in the runtime costs. So, looking for feedback here.
What is the size of the trade-off, would you say? Just curious.
It's a good question. I haven't measured it. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually.
Right. In terms of runtime costs, I have not measured it. I mean, first off, we're talking about a hypothetical usage of cell. One could ask about efficiency of cell. We could also, but the comparison is the efficiency of the non-cell based proposal, which is not implemented. So it's on that side. It's a hypothetical. On the other side, in terms of expressiveness, you don't need an implementation to do that. You can just look at the API design and see whether it can express what you want. And that's one of the questions. That's really a question that I have. There are, I think, some we have some use cases for customization, and I would like owners of those use cases to tell me whether the simpler approach, will suffice for the use cases.
Okay. Good. Thank you, Mike. Any more questions for Mike? So Mike, let's do me a favor. Can you update this the agenda with the discussion links for each one of the items that you asked for feedback on? That would be helpful.
Sure.
So that's a specific. Thank you. Okay. You want to take on modifiers next?
Okay. Yeah. So for both customization and summarization, there's this question of both for the intermediate level of customization, actually even for the simpler one. These are in some sense adverbs or modulators that modify how the propagation between center and edge is done. And there's, in some sense, a grammatic question in the broad sense of grammar, but really specifically in this technology, right? Currently there's a customizer object type. There are customizer objects, and there are going to be summarization objects that prescribe how to do summarization. The question is how to bind them to the workload objects that they apply to. In the current customization design, I made a deliberate choice that has the virtue that there's no it is syntactically impossible to have conflicts or multiple customization objects apply to a given workload object, because each workload object can refer to at most one customization object. So it's syntactically impossible to have multiple customization objects apply to a workload object. That makes some things simple in terms of thinking about it and implementing. However, it does have the downside that in order to apply customization, you actually have to have specific content in the workload objects to be customized. And that's a problem if you want to import these objects from somewhere else that doesn't have that content. So for example, if you want to import a Helm chart that somebody else is maintaining, it won't have this. On the other hand, for Helm charts, this is an example of a problem that a lot of people making Helm charts have foreseen, and they provide the linkage is done through annotations. And in a lot of Helm charts, they actually have the ability, when you instantiate the Helm chart, to add labels and annotations. So it's not depending on the Helm chart, it may or may not be a problem. And again, this is, looking for feedback of, whether this is a practical problem or, a good thing. With customization, it's conceptually, we could say that, we're going to link externally through some kind of binding object. And that would introduce the possibility of multiple customizations applying to the same workload object. We could deal with it in a few ways. We could say, oh, well, there should only be one. And if there's more than one, we'll treat that as an error condition. Or we could say, yeah, you can have more than one. We'll define, now then in that case, we have to define the order in which they're applied because that can matter. So for example, in Karmata, they do this. They define an order. They have external binding. They define an order in which things apply. We could do the same thing. It's more complex to think about and implement, but we could do it. So now for the other one, for summarization, it's not even a conflict. I think each summarization prescription will prescribe its own collection of summary objects. So there's not really a question of conflict or ordering. I think they more naturally combine independently. So this external binding is, I think, really not problematic at all and may even be a positive feature. I could imagine use cases where you would actually want multiple summarization prescriptions to apply to a given set of workload objects. So, again, looking for feedback here.
Question, Mike. So when you talk about modifying the workload object for the modifiers, I mean, what kind of modification? Are just talking about labels and annotations being added?
Annotations. You're talking about an annotation. So to enable parameter expansion, you put an annotation on that says parameter expansion is enabled. To enable the intermediate sort of customization, you put on an annotation that points to the customizer object.
Okay. Any specific reason why annotation not label for that?
Yeah. Labels in Kubernetes objects are very constrained in terms of the volume of label material that you can have. And this doesn't need to be a label. So I thought that, since it's a constrained resource, there's no need to consume it. So don't.
Okay. But the idea is you could inject those, as you said, you may have to deal with objects that somehow already exist, but you could inject those, for example, with customize or Helm, as you mentioned, right? That hopefully shouldn't be too much of a burden for folks that are importing this object somehow from something else.
Well, yes, that's the question, really. It depends on the scenario of, exactly how you're importing and what you're importing. So, so for example, for Helm charts, it depends on the chart. Some charts are written so that when you use it, you can add annotations. Some might not be. So that's a question. There's really a standard template, I think, that I think is out there and a lot of people follow. But I think, I've written example Helm charts that don't use that template. So I really don't know the prevalence of using that or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think will be for sure customized. It's kind of out of the box. You can always add labels easily. For Helm could be, more problematic. You may have to change the chart. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Mike? So Mike, thanks for leading us through all that discussion about trade-offs, concerns, and architecture. I really appreciate the time and effort you're putting in here. And I encourage all of you to give active feedback to Mike as one of the chief architects of KubeStellar. The product only becomes more inclusive if you offer your opinions. So we appreciate any feedback and input you can give on those discussions. Thank you. All right, 2 more items here to go through. I can't believe we battled through all this. I didn't think we would. All right, so the next one is requested time to talk with KubeSig multi-cluster. So we had a discussion, an audience with SIG multi-cluster folks. Mike had also joined the community call that they had, the regular community call. We were able to show them our infomercial, and they all got a good chuckle out of that. And we also then gave them an update as to what our concerns and where we're focusing our efforts and what problems we're trying to what challenges we're trying to tackle. They were very receptive. They had some good questions concerning where we had overlap, and Mike was able to give some pointers about our origin story about Edge and how that's provided information for how we proceed forward, right? Not losing focus on Edge, but including multi-cluster and multi-cloud as well. So it was good. It was received well, and I think in the future we should revisit and show them where we've had updates or inflections in our journey. But other than that, nothing real and really in terms of activity. Other than that, Mike, would you summarize it any other way? Was there anything else that you would want to impart on that?
Well, I guess my focus again is on I tend to focus on the technical things, right? So the interesting thing about SIG multi-cluster is, they've been on an evolutionary journey. If you look at their documentation, you'll see that they started out working on some projects that have now been mothballed. They've moved on to some other things. One of them it's interesting to me is the issue of inventory, which they took a crack at and decided they couldn't standardize. The other aspect that I found interesting is that they've been focusing on a different form of multi-cluster than we have. We've been working on a form of multi-cluster in which the managed clusters are specifically designed to operate independently. They've been working on a complementary form of multi-cluster where the managed clusters are intended to work together to accomplish some bigger coherent goal. So it's, interesting I think what we should be looking for is what's common and what's distinct between those two forms of multi-cluster, and obviously collaborate on the common parts. So, that's my take.
Okay, thank you, Mike. All right, folks, just some closing logistics. As you can see, we're watching, fairly regularly what's going on and who's hitting our doc site and what kind of activity we're seeing out there. And you can see that the number of regular users has increased fairly readily over the past few weeks. We've gone from, a trickle of a few tens of folks up to hundreds now. So we're getting regular, and there's regular visitors here. 2 users per minute is a really good average for us in terms of getting eyes and minds on our work. Struggling a bit with the African Peninsula and Asia, but Europe is starting to fill in, which is really interesting. This was empty beginning of this week, so we're starting to get some mind share here, specifically in Scandinavia and Sweden, of course. One of the reasons why that's important is there was a big, when I was doing my PhD work, there was a big constituency in Finland that were working on a speed project on how to accelerate the adoption of DevOps. And I'm really curious to see when Finland comes online here. They may have their hands tied in other concerns at the moment, given geopolitical temperatures. But I think we're starting to crack Europe, which is really a good sign. I'd like to see more adoption, especially in China. And although I don't know, maybe there's something in place there that blocks us from seeing their traffic, but I don't think that's the case. So my call to action here at the end of this call here is, if any of you know anybody in any of these regions that can help us promote the success and the adoption of KubeStellar, please, reach out, have our messages translated that are in LinkedIn or in Reddit groups, and send it out to these folks in their native regional tongue and their languages. And let's see if we can get more hands on keyboards and more minds around the ideas and concepts that KubeStellar imparts. So I'd like to really, stress that if we can start to make this part of the map blue, I think we'll start making good progress. Yeah, Andrea, you have your hand up.
I did. See, I'm modeling myself after Apollo because he's super polite. He always raises his hand, and I'm like, all right, I got to get there. So
Well,
I
that
did
is our community's default. I just didn't mention it at the beginning. I apologize. Go ahead.
Good. Well, I'm glad I'm conforming. So I was curious if you saw any drivers, so with the recent activity, was there, I know you did a LinkedIn post. Are we able to kind of correlate any of the activity to a specific blog post or something? Do you have a view of that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I did have a time, let me see, view traffic acquisition. There was a time when I could find that. It does show up in referrals. So I'll look for where that's captured, but I did see that. It did show up. It showed where they came from and how they got here.
Good, because that's always really helpful to know, right? Like if you know you're getting good traction on LinkedIn or whatever, you sort of focus some time and effort there. If we know something else is working better, like I think that's a good way to drive some of these numbers.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. All right, folks, next, any other questions for me about this? Okay, next up, in 2 weeks, what I'd like to do is the format we've had, fairly open-ended in the past, and I'd like to move to a little bit, have a small session on issues, squashing and so forth. We're going to make an attempt at moving in that direction. It's just the next logical step in, I think, maturing the community. If you're working on something and it's not already addressed or represented here in the issue list, please go ahead and make some time today to do so. And we start keeping a backlog, an active backlog of what we're working on. I think that would be useful for the community to see, and also to be able to chime in. Good first issues are aplenty, and we're just not representing them right now. That's the only closing comment I had, folks. Anybody else want to offer anything before we close? Okay, thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
you.
Bye.